Hey, it's Wei Wei, and do you know how to build a custom PC? Well, I'm going to show you how in this video. Alrighty guys, so pretty much when building a PC it might be a bit daunting, especially with all these parts displayed in front of us. But building a PC is generally very easy, and the case we're going to be building this PC in is the Corsair 400C as displayed now. So without further ado, let's get going. So first things first, you want an anti-static mat or surface to build on, and you're going to need your tools, your screw set, obviously your case, power supply, motherboard, CPU, your RAM, your water-cooled AIO, your fans, your hard drive and SSD, and any other accessories you'll be adding to the PC. Now first things first, we're going to get the case onto the table and we're going to start removing all the side panels. So we started by removing the clear panel first, putting that in a safe space, and then we're going to shift the case around and start removing the thumb screws for the other panel. And we'll place it to the side. Now with the front panel, you just have to pull it off with a bit of force, but not too much. And then we'll remove the front fan filter. Now the PC case is ready for building. So we'll flip it over to the side just so we can have a look at what's inside and how all the parts are going to work into it. So first things first, we're going to be installing our I/O shield. So this goes into that open slot there, and it goes in just by clicking the edges into place. Once that's in, we'll be sliding our motherboard in, so first of all with all the excess ports on the side, and then we'll just gently push it against the I/O shield so the middle stand goes through that support hole. Now with a Phillips head screwdriver, we're going to start applying these screws onto all the standoffs for the motherboard. So with screwing in all the motherboard stand screws, just make sure there's enough force on it to hold the motherboard in place, but not too much where it will damage the motherboard. And do this for all the remaining screws. Now we'll be inserting the CPU into this socket. First we'll start by removing the tension arm and the socket cover from the socket. Make sure to align the tiny triangle on the socket and the CPU before inserting. Gently insert the CPU and make sure to give it just a slight wiggle to ensure it's secure. Then bring down the cover and then reapply the tension arm. Once you've done this, the CPU socket cover will come off. And make sure to keep this for later when you are changing out the CPU or the motherboard to keep the pins safe. Now we will install the RAM. Make sure the notch on the RAM aligns up with the DIMM slot on the motherboard. Pull down the tension arms and then insert your RAM, aligning up with the notch. Once you push down on it, there will be a slight click to ensure that it's secure. Now we'll install the CPU water cooler. First of all, we're going to need to put the fans on the water cooler, and this AIO takes two 120mm fans. But first, we'll find out how we can identify the direction of airflow. Usually the bladed front with the company sticker will be drawing the air in, and would be pulling air through. Some fans, like this Noctua fan, will have directions molded into the side of its frame. So we'll place our AIO down and we'll align the fans. Remember, since the radiator will be against the front of the case, we want to see the frame backs of the fans. Now we'll be using these screws and washers to go through the fans into the radiator to secure them. Do this for all the fan holes. Success. Now we'll be placing the AIO into its mounting position. Use these screws to mount the radiator to the case. Make sure you loosely tighten the screws just so you can rearrange the radiator to fit perfectly so it doesn't interfere with any other hardware. Then finish by tightening the remaining screws. Make sure you feed the fan cables through the rubber grommets to hide them so it looks cleaner. Now to thermal solutions. We'll be placing thermal paste on the top of the CPU's IHS, and in most situations, stock coolers tend to already have thermal solutions given. But since we've already wiped ours, we're going to be applying a new solution. So we're going to be using Cooler Master's Master Gel Maker Nano and Thermal Spreader. Remove the cap and prepare to apply. So you would want to apply a rice grain or peas sized amount of thermal paste onto the IHS. For personal preference, I like to spread the thermal paste evenly before applying the cooler. Make sure not to get past the edges, otherwise some thermal paste could be conductive and it might short your motherboard, damaging the CPU and motherboard in the process. And now that that is done, we are going to start mounting the pump unit of the AIO, firstly with the bracket. Flip the case over so you have access to the rear of the motherboard. Once the back of the socket has been identified, make sure the threaded holes align with the rear mount points of the socket. Place the mounting bracket correctly on the rear of the motherboard. And then align the AIO pump header so the screws can mount into the rear bracket. Make sure you go on a diagonal when tightening the screws to evenly spread the thermal paste on the CPU IHS. Once the header has been fitted, make sure you install the pump into the CPU fan socket. Flip the case upright because we'll be installing the connectors from the front of the case. Pass all the cables through the rubber grommets and then plug them into the allocated areas on the motherboard. And make sure you refer to the motherboard manual for all power and reset plugs. We won't be using any USB 3 because there are no ports for this on the motherboard. Make sure to clean up after yourself and cable tie any loose cables to make them neat for the final build. Otherwise, you can tuck any remaining cables in any empty spaces in the case edge. Now, we'll be moving on to the power supply. For the power supply, it will be mounted at the very bottom of the case. Make sure when installing the power supply that the screw holes align with the holes on the case. We'll be using these screws to secure the power supply. Once all the screws are in place, make sure to give the power supply a bit of a wiggle to ensure it's secure. Now we'll be moving on to the cables. Make sure to plug in the CPU cables first to get them out of the way, and then run them behind the motherboard tray to keep them neat. Now we'll be installing the graphics card. Begin by removing two PCI brackets. Loosen up the thumb screws with a screwdriver before removing them by hand. And then gently slide out the two PCI brackets. You'll be firstly installing the gold contacts on the bottom of the graphics card into the PCIe slot. Firstly, push down the clip to open up the PCIe slot, and then align the PCIe bracket to the rear of the motherboard. Then gently slide the contacts into the PCIe slot, and make sure the clip comes up, securing the graphics card. Once the graphics card is in, make sure to replace the thumb screws to secure the PCIe brackets. And make sure to tighten these thumb screws to secure the graphics card in place. And then run power from the power supply to the graphics card. This graphics card takes two 6-pin power connectors. Make sure to run the power connectors through the rubber grommets through the back of the motherboard tray to ensure a clean build. Once you pull the cables through, make sure you align the clips perfectly before installing the power connectors. Now that we've got the graphics card installed, we'll be installing our Wi-Fi card. We'll be removing only one bracket this time, so remove the thumb screw with a screwdriver and then slide the PCI bracket out. Just like with the graphics card, we'll be installing the gold contacts into the PCIe slot while running the PCI bracket along the rear of the case. Gently push down on the Wi-Fi card until the contacts are inside the slot. And then make sure to reapply the thumb screws. Now we'll be installing the hard drives. First of all, we'll be removing the removable quick access hard drive trays from the back of the hard drive bay. To mount the hard drives, place the two prongs on either end of the hard drive tray and simply flex the hard drive tray till the prongs insert into the threaded sockets. For the SSD, the mounting holes on the bottom of the hard drive tray will be mounted to the bottom of the SSD in these holes here. These screws will secure the SSD. Place the SSD down on the hard drive tray and then mount in a diagonal position the two screws, and that will secure the SSD. Place the hard drive and the SSD back into the hard drive bay. To power the hard drive and SSD, we'll be plugging in our SATA power connectors. Make sure this is also plugged into your power supply to ensure there is power. Once the power is connected, we'll be using these SATA cables to connect the hard drives and SSDs to the motherboard. Once connected, feed the cable through the motherboard tray to keep it neat. Do the same for the SSD. Once the SATA cables are passed through, make sure you plug them into the SATA ports on the motherboard. With the addition of a fan controller, make sure you plug this into power before plugging any fans in. So align the L-shaped connector and insert. And then plug in your fan connectors. Before we forget, we'll be installing our rear fan, which will be our exhaust fan. Make sure to remember that the exposed blade should be pointed towards the inside of the case, for it will be drawing all the hot air out to the rear. You'll be using these screws to tighten the fan. And make sure to align and secure all four corners of the fan. And then plug in the last remaining fan cable to the fan controller. Now to neaten up this mess. Make sure you cable tie all the different runs of cables separately to make a very neat and presentable cable management job. Use cable ties where necessary and make sure to clip off any remaining excess cable ties so it is neat and presentable. After we clip our last cable tie, we'll be applying all final accessories. So we'll be screwing on the Wi-Fi antenna, then we'll be replacing the back panel. Once the panel is on, we'll apply our thumb screws to secure it, reapply the front dust filter, and clip on the front cover, and then we'll replace our clear panel. Now the PC is complete. Alrighty guys, so pretty much once we've got the system set up, we have to see if it will post. So we'll just press the power button now. And then we'll see a signal pop up on the television. There we go. So it's posting and the system seems to be working in order. So pretty much all we got to do next is install Windows 10 and then pretty much get all the system software set up and get it running. So pretty much if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button below, and yeah, if you've learnt anything, make sure you hit that bell notification icon to stay updated for future videos. And yeah, pretty much take care guys, and I'll see you in the next video.